In the final months of World War II, a small group of German women, POWs, stepped off the truck onto a dusty American ranch in the Southwest. They expected punishment. They expected shouting. Some even expected to be sent back immediately. Instead, they were met by silence. A few American cowboys leaned against a wooden fence, hats low over their eyes, quietly studying the newcomers. These were not soldiers in polished boots. These were working men. Sunburned faces, calloused hands, worn denim, and horses tied nearby. An American officer read from a clipboard. The women would be assigned light farm duties, sorting supplies, helping in the kitchen, basic work only. One woman stepped forward when her name was called. She was barely standing straight. Her coat hung on her like it belonged to someone else. A cowboy removed his hat and looked at her closely. Then he said something no one expected. "You're too thin to work." The interpreter repeated the sentence in German. The woman froze. Too thin. To work? Back home, being thin meant you worked harder. It meant you were pushed more, not less. The other women stared. Some lowered their eyes. One whispered that this must be a test. The cowboy shook his head slowly. "No," he said, pointing toward the ranch house. "She eats first." The officer hesitated, but nodded. As the woman was led away, the cowboys didn't joke. They didn't smile. They watched in silence, because this was only the beginning of what they were about to do. The woman was led into the ranch house slowly, as if every step might be a mistake. She expected orders. She expected to be told where to sit, when to stand, when to leave. Instead, the door closed behind her, and the smell hit first. Hot bread, coffee, something frying in a pan. She hadn't smelled food like this in years. An older woman in an apron, an American civilian, looked up from the stove. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look at papers. She simply pulled out a chair. "Sit," she said gently. The German woman didn't move. Back in the yard, the other prisoners watched through the window, tense and silent. No one believed this was real. Kindness, after the war they had lived through, always came with a price. Outside, one of the cowboys finally spoke to the officer. "If she works now," he said quietly, "she'll break." The officer replied that these were prisoners, not guests. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "She's a person," he said, "and if she breaks, that's on us." There was a long pause. Then something unexpected happened. The cowboys began setting rules of their own. Anyone who looked weak would eat first. Anyone who collapsed would be sent to rest. No punishment. No shouting. No rushing. When the woman inside was handed a full plate, her hands started shaking. She tried to eat slowly, politely, but halfway through, tears fell into the food. Not from fear, from disbelief. Outside, the other women saw it, and for the first time since their capture, they realized this place was different. This was not a test. This was not humiliation. And whatever these American cowboys were planning next, it was going to change everything. The next morning, the camp expected movement. At dawn, trucks usually arrived. Orders were shouted. Lines formed. Work began. This time, nothing. The German women stood in the yard, waiting. Some had slept better than they had in months. Others hadn't slept at all, afraid the kindness would be taken back. An American officer checked his watch and frowned. "Why aren't they moving?" he asked. One of the cowboys leaned against the fence, arms crossed. "Because we're not starting yet." The officer reminded him that schedules mattered, that supplies needed sorting, that time was being wasted. The cowboy didn't argue. He simply raised his voice so everyone could hear. "No one works until everyone can stand." The interpreter repeated it. The women froze. Some looked down at their hands, hands that shook from weakness. Others tried to straighten their backs, embarrassed by their own bodies. One woman took a step forward and nearly fell. Before the guards could react, two cowboys were already there, steadying her gently, as if she were family. "Sit," one said. "Rest," said the other. The officer snapped that this was turning into a problem, but the cowboys had already made their decision. They canceled the morning labor, then the afternoon work, then the next day's assignments. Instead, they brought water, blankets, extra food. Word spread fast through the camp. Not shouting, but quiet orders. Not punishment, but patience. By the third day, something changed. The women began to walk differently. Slower, but steadier. They talked more. One even laughed softly while washing her hands, then stopped herself, surprised. The officer watched from a distance, uneasy. This was no longer standard procedure. This was something else. And when a military truck arrived late that afternoon, with new orders from higher command, the Cowboys didn't step aside. They stepped forward. The truck arrived just after noon. Not supplies, not food, officers. They stepped out stiffly, boots clean, expressions unreadable. Papers were unfolded, questions were asked. The camp commander gestured toward the yard, already prepared to explain. But the explanation never came. Instead, the officers saw it themselves. The women were not lined up like before. They stood in small groups. Some sat on benches. Others leaned against fences, talking quietly. No one was rushing them. No one was shouting. One officer turned sharply to the Cowboys. "This is not how POW labor camps operate." The oldest cowboy stepped forward. "Then don't call it labor," he said. "Call it recovery." There was silence. An officer pointed toward one of the women, the same one who had been declared too thin to work. "She's walking now," he said. "She wasn't before." The cowboy nodded. Because she ate. Because she rested. Because someone treated her like she'd survive. The officers exchanged looks. No one argued. That afternoon, the orders changed. The women would not be sent back to heavy labor. They would remain under care until they could safely work or be transferred home. When the news was translated, no one cheered. They simply stood there. One by one, the women straightened their shoulders. A few days later, when the transport finally came, the Cowboys lined the fence again. Hats off. Silent. The woman who had eaten first turned back once before stepping onto the truck. She didn't wave, she didn't speak, she just stood upright, for the first time in years. And the Cowboys watched until the dust settled, knowing they had done something the war would never record, but the people involved would never forget.